Welcome to the People Leaders Podcast, the audio resource for managers and business leaders creating high-performing teams. Join leadership and team development experts Jen and Michelle Turkelson each week as they explore both subjects from every angle. Through practical tips, valuable insights, and compelling interviews with leadership experts around the world, you'll learn how to bring out the best in your staff and how to give your best as a leader.
Okay, so hello everyone. Really excited by this podcast. Michelle isn't with us today, and we have someone, pretty special on in replacement. So usually Michelle and I will talk. Sometimes we'll have, experts in the field of leadership and, training. And this particular person, Robin Rosenberg, has come to us through different channels, and I've been stalking her on her website and LinkedIn and things like that because I'm really excited about her focus. And what Robin does is she uses virtual reality platforms to teach leaders about inclusion, diversity, and equity. And so she's really we're singing from the same songbook. So Robin is the CEO and she's the founder of Live in Their World. And it's a company built to improve workplace culture. And they do this by using virtual reality methods. And so what that does is it immerses individuals in workplace scenarios, and it teaches them diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I love because it is all about running it through the nervous system. That's why we do a lot of role play. So Robin is certainly doing that in her VR, which is virtual reality. She's been interested in this for years and was the lead author of a study to investigate using virtual reality for good. And she's combined her interest in those immersive technologies with her coaching and her clinical experiences in order to, foster that really deep understanding about why people do the things that they do and why some people might feel slighted or marginalised, and actually how to approach such interactions differently depending on the type of person. So Robin is also an academic. She's got an MA and a PhD in psychology, and she's also, what don't you do, Robin? You're also an author of both college-level psychology textbooks and also books for general audiences about the psychological underpinnings of fictional characters and superheroes, featured on Marvel's podcast. So you are such an interesting personality. So welcome, Robin.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, great. And so, Robin, where are you speaking from right now?
Right now, I'm in New York City.
New York. And how is that now?
Now it is amazing. The city is really waking up. Our COVID rates are quite low, especially compared to how they were. People, wear masks inside, except obviously in restaurants. But there's the outdoor restaurant scene here is amazing. How is it there?
Yeah, so at the moment we're June 2021, and we have little outbreaks, and as soon as there's a little outbreak, everything gets shut down. And so we're kind of starting to learn, or I think we're starting to learn to live with it, because we've got really good, or now we have really good contact tracing. I think that's an important feature. And then a lot more and more people, I think, are getting vaccinated. There are still people who are, vaccine interested, and, exploring all those impacts. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty gritty. So when I was reading your website and also your LinkedIn, you had some, key questions that people could ask you. And so I cherry picked my top 5. And for our audience, a lot of them are either leaders in organisations, corporate organisations, or they're leading small to medium businesses. We also have HR professionals. We have people from all across the world who listen to our podcast, and particularly, what we try and focus on, and what are those practical scenarios and strategies that we can share through our stories, and also, for you, Robin, through your research. So the things that the first question that I'd love to ask you, so leaders that are listening now, so they've got a team, they're working in an environment, that hybrid environment. what could they do to really promote diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Great question. For me, I actually change the order of the acronym when I think about it. So it's EID for me because equity comes first, and it's not just equity, it's transparent equity. So I think one of the things the leaders can do is to do an equity audit, like a compensation audit, for instance, and make adjustments based on what the audit says, so that if there is some compensation inequity, for instance, that it's corrected, if you will. And why is that important? So most people really like to work in an organization that feels fair. And really, equity is about fairness fundamentally. And so, and a company can really try to be fair. They can do equity audits and then make any corrections. But if they don't tell people, if they're not transparent and they hide it, people don't know that they're making all of this effort. So they're doing the work without getting the additional benefits, and the employees really feeling like it's a fair place. So that's why I start there, because really, inclusion and diversity really flow from a place of fairness and respect.
Right. So for an equity audit, what would that look like? So if I'm a leader leading a team, what could I do?
So one of the things, there are consultants who can come in and do this with you, or sometimes law firms. It's really, if we're doing compensation equity, for instance, that's in a sense easier because it's numbers. And so you would look at people's pay packages for the level of work that they do, and whatever other metrics you decide are appropriate that go into the calculation. So for some people, it may be their educational background, but it's an opportunity to say, well, wait, why does it matter how many years of schooling someone has if it doesn't affect how they do their job? I mean, if someone needs a PhD in bioengineering, sure, I get that, right? But you're not going to hire anyone who doesn't have a degree in bioengineering to do that work. But for many other jobs, why does it matter? And so should we be paying people more, right? Is that fair? So it's really rethinking, what is it that you're rewarding? How is that tied to performance or not? I mean, tied to something else? And are we making sure that different, people with different demographic identities are being paid equivalently?
Yeah, and for the work that they do. And I think that's where role clarity is really important. Like, what is the purpose of this role? Are we clear about the talents and the skill set that's needed for that? So, yeah, they all tie in, don't they?
It all ties. So, and then when you have equity and you have fairness, and it's the transparency is really important, then what happens is you can really say, we value everyone, we respect people, and we expect you to respect each other. And here's what that means. And then you have to get inclusion, right? And because if you have diversity without inclusion, diversity hiring, if you will, hiring for diversity without inclusion, people will leave because they're actually not welcome.
Yeah. So can you give us an example of that, Robin? Of how would a leader of inclusion? So if I'm leading, what would some of those examples or behaviours that would signify that I am an inclusive leader?
Got it. So in terms of team meetings, for instance, there are many small signals that convey inclusion. So one is how you handle interruptions or rudeness, we might call it. We actually call what we do civility training, because fundamentally civility is about unearned respect just because it's the right thing to do. But it's tracing who's spoken, how do tasks get assigned? Do people volunteer? Do they have to volunteer? How do I get input from people who don't tend to speak in meetings? How do I draw people out? How do I respond to ideas, even that may seem wacky, right? How do I, as a leader, model and show I really value people giving their ideas, problem solving with me? And leaders also, they want to be saying, what am I missing? Right? That is the way that bias can often show up, is what's not said, what's not done, who's not asked, and so it's who's not in this meeting that should be. That doesn't mean everyone should be in the meeting, by the way. That's a whole other issue. But it's really showing people that you are being very thoughtful. It's transparent, again, that word, about making sure everyone is involved and engaged and valued and respected. And that's where then we get into equity, right? Because how is stretch work assigned versus mundane, boring detail work, the drudgery? How, who's taking notes, or what's called housekeeping tasks, right? So there are many ways that are very little that add up very powerfully. And fundamentally also, how does a leader take feedback? Because it's modeling taking feedback well is really important, because feedback is how we learn, how each of us learns. And so when a leader models, wow, I just, out of my mouth, I said, Stephanie, would you clean up the table? Like, no, that's not Stephanie's job, right? So my bad, and sort of owning that and modeling that mistake is a lovely thing. Or someone says to you, hey, maybe Stephanie shouldn't clean up, that you want them to tell you. That is an amazing form of leadership. That absolutely. People know you want that information.
And there is an art to actually receivership, like, can I receive feedback? And that's what I'd really be interested in, is what do you think are the best practices of giving and receiving feedback?
Great question. In brief, I think one of I'll divide it into two, because they're really quite different. For giving feedback, I think the first thing is to really think about what your goal is.
Yeah.
Right. There might be a near-term goal or a long-term goal, but really to identify your goal and to think about not how you would want it said to you, but the person you're telling would want it said to them. Right. Because we often have a hard time getting out of our own heads. And so the goal is for the person to hear it. So that's important. Super important. We know from tons of research that being as behavior focused rather than style or kind of vague personality characteristics or something, this focusing on specific behaviors is the best form of giving feedback. So it may be a one-off behavior, or it may be a pattern of behavior. But, it's not helpful to say, you don't have a leadership style. What does that mean? First of all, there are many different styles of leadership, but also, what does that mean? It doesn't help people grow and develop. Or if you're putting them on, a performance improvement plan, I don't know if they have that phrase, but where you are, but you want people to understand, what is the specific goal? Why are you giving them feedback? What is it you want them to do? Not who do you want them to be?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's really, really important. And then I like to think from a DEI perspective is, if this person I'm giving feedback to were of a different demographic group, would I be giving the same feedback? And if not, I need to really think about why am I giving them, why am I giving this person the feedback when I wouldn't give it to someone else for the very same behaviors?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's on the giving feedback end. I can keep going, but
No, that's good. Short and sweet is good, Robin, for sure.
Right. And then on the receiving end, someone is really it's the framework. Well, actually, let me backtrack. If you're going to give someone feedback, it helps to just give them even a tiny bit of warning.
Yes.
Right. And to ask if this is a good time.
Yeah.
Continuous feedback. Right. Continuous feedback is best rather than waiting and dumping it all on a performance review or even a one-on-one. In the moment is most helpful, but you don't want to literally sideswipe people, because then they're not likely to take in the feedback. So it's to say, hey, I wanted to give you some feedback that, may be helpful to you. Is this a good time or should we meet later? So, okay. So that's the giving, sorry. And then we've got the receiving. So if someone's going to the trouble to give you feedback, it's to really try to hear. And it's from the perspective of a growth mindset, which is really being open and curious. They're doing you this favor to help your professional development. And so not to hear it as a test, like when you were in school and that, I got a B instead of an A, or, demerit points or something. But it's they're telling you this because they want to be helpful to you. And that to really, really, really keep that in mind and not view it as I failed. And even if they're giving you feedback because you screwed up, they're telling you so you can know. Because if they don't tell you, it's not helpful. And you may know, okay, well, so I know I screwed up, and why are they telling me? Work with them about what you can learn from the situation. So the other thing just related to that is if you get feedback you don't agree with, you can talk to the person, I don't see it the way you do. Here's how I see it. It's not like you have to just accept it. You want it to be useful. But if even after having a conversation about it, you fundamentally don't agree, it's to try to find the kernel in there that you can take away, because they're seeing something that you don't see. Ask trusted friends and colleagues and family members about it. Don't just discount it because the person's a jerk or they don't understand or something like that. So those are just some highlights.
Yeah. And I love that, because what you're actually asking, or what you could be asking, is what am I missing? And that person is telling you potentially what you are missing,
exactly.
Blind spot or whatever. That's why I think it's such an important question. So some of those aspects of giving and receiving feedback, I can imagine may need to shift because a lot of us are working in remote or hybrid workforces. Like, what do you think are going to be some of those challenging aspects in having a remote or hybrid workforce?
So they're different, actually. So I think with the remote, when it's remote and everyone is remote, there are certain set of issues, and I'm happy to talk about them. But as many companies are heading toward hybrid, I'm in a way more interested in hybrid because
I agree.
But we can go back to remote. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
For hybrid, there's going to be a DEI issue around bias about in-person versus remote workers, or workers who were just in person more days than workers who were there sometimes and not others. There's a psychological phenomenon called the mere exposure effect, which is the more we are exposed to something, meaning seeing it, interacting with it, hearing about it, the more likely we are to become positively inclined toward that person, place, or thing. Unless there's a reason, obviously, not to. I mean, if you don't like someone and they're a jerk, then the more time you spend with them, you won't necessarily feel positively inclined. But most of the time, you will feel more positively. And that the mere exposure effect is the reason we have all kinds of ads for political candidates and campaigns and referenda. It's just the same principle, just the familiar billboards, same concept.
So Robin, and I can see that for part-time workers as well. So what do you think, besides having an understanding that there could be a potential bias, if I am a remote worker, what could I do differently in order to promote that exposure?
So one of the things that you can do is try to connect with your call. I mean, this is true whether it's all remote, the whole company is remote, or you are a remote worker in a hybrid organization. Is it would be great if they made the outreach to you, but they may not. And so it's being present in some way, shape, or form as much as possible, contributing on Slack more than you otherwise might. Not multitasking during a Zoom meeting.
Yes.
But paying attention, or at
Yes.
least back channeling people during the meeting, so that you are not. You want to be seen and heard, so to speak. Now, this is also can be problematic if you're an introvert. So that's a whole other set of issues to factor in. But the idea is to try to be as engaged and participate as much as you can. There are ways of collaborating. So virtual reality, for instance, offers all kinds of ways for people to meet, to feel co-located, if you will, even when they're not.
Mm.
So there's a company in the States called meetinvr.com, and they, have all kinds of ways for feeling co-located using virtual reality. There are mixed reality versions of the same thing. So that's one. There are other really straightforward things that companies can do. There's in the States, there are companies, there's like called Sidekick or Sneak, that have these devices or platforms where you see your teammates. Sometimes it's a separate device next to your computer. Sometimes it's on your computer. So you could just see your teammates like they were, sitting just across from you. Mm-hmm. And it's easy. You just touch the screen and then you can talk to them the same way you tap them on the shoulder and roll your chair over. So there's that sense of not quite co-location, but it's trying to adjust for it, if you will, and have that sense of teamness and engagement. Yeah. So companies, if you're a leader and you have a fully remote or a hybrid team, it's really thinking about how can we do this? Sometimes there's a coffee in the coffee area, they have a big screen. And so there are ways of engaging people who are remote. And, it's really thinking deeply, if you're a leader, about how to do that and knowing I may have this bias and how do I counter it. Mm. And then for the leader, there's the issue of when I can't see my people working, how do I know they're really working?
Yeah, the trust part. And that's what we recommended to people at COVID, that we recommended that leaders just have a picture of all their teams so they just could connect with, like I wonder what, Sharon is going through now, and just so they could actually see on their board just pictures of their team. Again, it's just trying to kind of get that, connection with them. So do you think the remote work will remain feasible, like after the pandemic is over?
Fully remote or hybrid?
I think hybrid. I don't think fully remote. I think, Leah, what do you think?
So I think there are organizations and companies that can be fully remote. There are that have been, for a while. So pre-pandemic they were. And I think it depends on what the mission and purpose of the company is and the type of employees they have and the type of collaboration that or co-creation that goes on. And also what kind of people tend to do that work. I think for extroverts, it's really hard. There are ways to do it. You can, rent some WeWork space and, so you're remote, but you're not actually alone at home. Or at least not all the time. So you can, or you meet people for lunch or whatever. I think hybrid is a grand experiment. It's going to be fascinating. And even remote work, this was not the best test case. I mean, it worked amazingly on short notice under horrific circumstances.
Yeah.
So it obviously does work. Is it the best way to do it? That's complicated. We know that there are problems with fully remote work with collaborating. It is harder. It's harder to feel engaged and a sense of teamness. A lot of the social stuff, what you would predict, the things that we miss about the office. And then we know that there are what I call micro interactions that happen. So for instance, let's say you and I were in a team meeting and we disagreed, right, passionately with each other about what the best path forward is. Later on in the day when I'm walking by your desk or you're walking by my desk, we don't even have to say anything. We'll just look at each other and we'll kind of make nice, But if you're remote, you don't have that opportunity. You have to schedule a Zoom call or you're on Zoom with other people and you don't even know, or it becomes more complicated to make repair, which is, what we might call it as a psychologist. So, or even checking in with each other in that little micro interactional way. So,
I think there are opportunities. It just takes a little bit more consciousness. Like you could actually send someone a text. Are we okay? Do we need to get complete? An emoji. I think this remote environment just is flexing the way in which we can connect. It takes a little bit more, maybe time and energy to begin with, because we're not just used to it.
So we can, and this is where it gets a little more complicated if you didn't know each other in person before COVID.
Yes.
Because to even ask you in a text, are we okay? Actually raises it up a notch versus just walking by your desk and are glancing at each other, right? And I may be like, whoa, what is she asking me? Like, yeah, I'm fine. Why aren't you? I mean, if I don't know you, I don't really understand why you're asking me. So it can get complicated. And then there are really interesting cohort issues, at least in the States, where younger employees have, have less experience having hard conversations than their counterparts of younger employees from other cohorts, because the current crop of younger employees has experienced ghosting on dates, sort of not responding. They do things by text. They, typically don't have so many hard conversations. And so they're less skilled in that area to even think about texting, hey, are we okay? Or, so, and if they were hired, once COVID started, they don't really know people in the office in the same way. So there are really interesting issues, cohort issues about employees and upskilling for respectful conversations.
Absolutely. And I think for us, it is the most requested training is having difficult conversations. And I was having a conversation with a mentor group, and they're all CEOs. And I gave them a list of all the key skills around leaders, like whether it's, delegation, difficult conversations, presentations. Difficult conversations by far was the most important thing that they thought that every leader needs to be able to do and isn't doing well. So it really plays into your
it's hard. I mean, I actually we do leadership training for civility and respectful engagement.
I love that.
But I feel it's really an enormous burden on leaders and managers now, because the soft skill component is so important. That it's when do I get the work done? I mean, it is the work, and that's or a part of the work. But it doesn't feel, there isn't really a sense of progress, So there's a book written by a professor at Harvard Business School called The Progress Principle, which have you read that book?
No, but I know it. I know the principle. Yeah, I love it. And it works.
So the idea is that we feel good about our jobs when we have more forward motion than kind of frustration by obstacles. And so the more days we have forward motion, the better we feel. And I think for managers, where so much of the job often is soft skill based, it's not, what does forward motion mean? And I think it's often not recognized seriously recognized in a concrete way by, the higher level leaders and managers, and rewarded, the same sort of gratitude and appreciation for that work. It's just like, yeah, you need to have soft skills, but not, wow, your team really values, you do a great job of engaging them. This is exactly what we want. You help our attrition. You help that team be productive. If you can really show we're talking about managers, really the frontline managers in a sense, that you value the work that we're doing, that they're doing, that's so hard and doesn't really have direct, tangible forward motion progress. We're measuring it indirectly by employee satisfaction. And there are many other things that go into employee satisfaction.
Absolutely.
Engagement.
Yeah. And that's just kind of like one measurement. And to your point before is like, sometimes we actually have to connect the dots for people about, so what are you seeing, the behaviors that you're seeing in your team now that you didn't before? And that's progress. So it's actually being able to have those conversations. So, Robin, is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with if we're looking at that equity, inclusion and diversity? So I'm either a team member or I'm a leader. Like, what do you think is one activity that they could do if they did it constantly and consistently and they did it well, that would create the biggest difference?
On the inclusion end, what I would say is explain to your folks why DEI is personally important to you, as well as important to the company, but really to you personally. Storytelling is really powerful. And so it's really making yourself vulnerable enough to share the story of why it matters. And if it doesn't matter to you, to actually find a vehicle in so that it does matter.
I love that.
Because if they know it matters to you and you're watching, then they respond accordingly.
Yeah.
So it's not just telling the story. It's kind of, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah, and why? Beautiful. Thank you so much, Robin. I really appreciated your time, and I've written so many notes around that. Just some of those nuggets around that. Like behaviorally focused when you're giving feedback, the receiving it, you got to hear it. And one of those key questions, I'm all about, really good questions, like what am I missing? I think that's a really good thing because the brain will deliver what it is that you're asking for. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jan, your listeners, if they want, can get, we have a white paper of best practices on giving and receiving feedback. So they can come to our website. It's liveintheirworld.com/publications. And it's there as just, for the white papers right there.
Sure. And we will have a link to your website and possibly directly to the white paper as well, because I think a lot of our listeners are really eager for that information as well. So thank you so much, Robin. We will stay in touch, and I'm going to stalk you on LinkedIn.
Great. Thank you so much. Great questions. I love the contribution. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you for joining us on the People Leaders Podcast. For show notes and other resources, please visit us at peopleleaderspodcast.com. If you have a leadership or management question or subject you'd like covered on the podcast, please contact us at podcast@peopleleaders.com.au. The People Leaders Podcast is brought to you by the Experts on Air Podcast Network.